Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Alright, hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. And today, we are so honored to be joined by MP Don Davies, the Member of Parliament for here, the beautiful Vancouver Kingsway, and a very special interview for both of us because we actually grew up near here and we spent a large portion of our childhood here. So it's really great to be back and talking to MP Davies about some of the things that we are so passionate about, and these are issues that he's been fighting so hard to alleviate. So it's really cool being here. And how are you doing today, MP Davies?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much, Jerry. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Welcome to my office.
Yeah.
And really looking forward to talking.
Yeah, us too. So, as you can probably guess, and you probably knew, like when we walked in, our name is Twin Talk Politics, so it's no surprise that we are actually twins. Our first question was actually going to be on guessing who is who, but you actually were able to pick up on our language and see who is who, so we've adjusted the question a little bit. So, still a 50-50, who do you think is older out of the two of us, and by how many minutes, if you want to give a ballpark?
Okay. That's tough. Well, I was lucky on that. I was Jason and Jerry, so I got that right. I'm going to guess that Jason is older.
Oh wow, that's great. That's great. How many minutes? How many minutes?
I'm going to say 2.5 minutes.
Oh wow,
That's really close. It was 3. So if you round up, it's technically there.
Yeah, wow.
That's
Jeez, I got to go buy lottery tickets.
Yeah,
I'm
really
lucky.
lucky.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. So now that you know how to tell us apart, who's older and by how many minutes, let's just jump straight into the interview. So the first question we have is, I know we talked a little bit about this before, but Jay and I obviously know how amazing of a person you are, all the amazing initiatives you've passed and supported. But for those who sort of don't know who you are, we are wondering if you could please maybe introduce yourself, your background, and maybe how you got interested and involved in politics in the first place.
Well, first of all, thank you both for your interest, and to see young people who are so passionate about their country and their society and issues around is really inspiring to me. And so thanks so much for coming on. Well, so I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, in 1963. So I'm 61. And I spent my first 27 years in Alberta. And we moved out here when my wife got accepted to UBC to do a master's program. She's a speech pathologist.
Oh, wow.
So we moved out here and landed in family housing on the UBC campus. And once I came out here and I had my first January where I only wore a jean jacket, I thought, I'm not leaving. This is paradise. No, we loved BC immediately, fell in love, so we've been here really for the last 34 years.
Wow.
What got me involved in politics? It's a funny thing. I guess I've always been interested in sort of the world around me. When I was in elementary and junior high school, I gravitated towards kind of the social studies, English kind of stuff. I did okay in the sciences, but I was more of a social studies guy. So I was interested in politics from a very young age. And I was also interested in how decisions were made. Obviously things are happening around, whether you have a school dance, whether or not, what's going to happen in your school at the time mattered to me. And I thought, well, someone has to make those decisions. So I thought, well, I wanted to be part of that process. And finally, I guess from a very young age, I was always very short. I was always maybe one of the smallest kids in class. And when you're the smallest kid in class, you're very sensitive to power structures.
Yeah.
And so ever since as long as I can remember, I've been passionate about justice. I don't like injustice of any type, whether it's bullying or whether it's unfairness or, whether people are abusing power. It's bothered me for as long as I was little. And so I think part of my desire to want to seek office is a desire to kind of see what the problems are and make sure that people are treated fairly. And I think I can trace that right back to being just a young boy in elementary. I can tell you the very first election I ever ran in was grade 7.
Oh, wow.
I was in student council and I ran in grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I was president of my junior high school, president of my high school. I ran in university. I was on the university student council a few times. And then I volunteered on a lot of campaigns.
Yeah.
Between then and now, I became a lawyer. We can get into that in a bit. And then, back in 2006, we had a very, it was a very momentous event that happened in Kingsway here. We had a person elected as a Liberal, and within 10 days he had crossed the floor to sit as a Conservative.
Wow.
And was considered a betrayal of the voters, and that was a spark that made me want to seek federal office, and so I did after that.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting about how like a very funny story of you being on the shorter side and in like elementary school has led to so many cool things that you've done, and all your aspirations of solving social justice, as we're probably going to talk about a lot later, have really come to fruition. You've really done a lot and really have fought to seek justice in our society. So thank you for that. As you probably know, our podcast is really created by the youth for the youth. So our second question comes in two parts, and we'll kind of follow this stream of thought. So firstly, what are your opinions and what are your thoughts on the major and the biggest problems concerning youth in Canada as a whole? And then secondly, what do you think are the biggest issues for youth in your own constituency of Vancouver Kingsway?
Great questions. I'm not sure that there's going to be a difference between youth in general, but I'll try to see if I can parse a difference. But in terms of youth in general, I would probably guess that fundamentally it's, I think, the climate crisis, and then I would think affordability issues writ large. So I'll start with the climate crisis. You know, when I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, the existential threat that faced all of us that made us stay up at night worried was the nuclear threat. That time we had the Cold War, and it really seemed like, you know, the people who were in charge and in power then, if they didn't have their act together through mistake or through poor behavior, threatened the existence of the planet.
Yeah, for sure.
And I suspect, talking to a lot of young people, that maybe a similar feeling occurs with the climate crisis, where young people are worried that the generations that have come before them have, I guess, made so many policy errors that we really risk living in a comfortable way on this planet. And so I think that's an existential threat that young people who have a much longer time horizon, like, you know, young men your age, you know, are going to have to live maybe 80 years down the road with decisions we make today.
Yeah, sure.
So that's number one. And I would say affordability issues. You know, I read recently that your generation might be the first generation in Canada ever that may not have a higher standard of living than your parents.
Oh, wow.
It may actually regress. And I think there's reasons for that. You know, it's university, post-secondary education is more expensive, tougher to get into, more competitive. When I was growing up, if you got a good job with an employer, you could likely stay with that employer for maybe your whole career. Now people are looking at instability in their employment and many changes in gigs. The idea of having like a full pension with a company so that as you work over 10, 20, 30 years, you will earn a pension that will take you through adulthood is in jeopardy. And just the cost of everything, I think, is going up. Housing. Like housing. You know, my generation, I got to tell you, when I grew up in Edmonton, 1970s and 80s, in every city in the country, there's always a rich area, there's a medium area, there's a less desirable area.
For sure.
Sometimes there's big houses, there's medium houses, then there's you know, smaller houses, might be townhouses, apartments, condos, duplexes. Everybody pretty much could afford to buy something. Right? This was nobody even thought about this. Like you know, maybe a duplex in a less desirable part of town or whatever, but you could buy something that you could call your own, as well as rent. If you wanted to rent, you could find lots of stuff to rent at affordable prices. This is the first generation, your generation, where you may not actually be able to purchase your own home. And I think that's very destabilizing, you know, because your home anchors you in community. You know, housing is a commodity. We buy and sell it, make money on it, but it's more than that. It's a necessity. Everybody has to have it. And so it anchors you. You know, where you're anchored in community, it situates you with your neighbors. It puts you in, you know, it influences where you work. It determines whether you're close or not to your family, your parents, your cousins, your siblings, your grandparents. And, you know, when I was health critic for 8 years, I found that those social determinants of health, whether you have stable housing, access to nutritious food, clean water, connection to community are the single biggest correlations to health.
Oh, wow.
You can't be healthy if you don't have those things. So to bring that to a close in terms of young people, I think it's young people are worried about their future, making sure they have solid careers, solid jobs, solid homes, security for their future, as well as the planetary one. In terms of people of Vancouver Kingsway, I'm sure that those are prime concerns here too. I would probably add some of the unique features here are Vancouver, and particularly Vancouver Kingsway, is an incredibly diverse community. Unlike places, there's communities in this country that are more uniform. If you go to rural Alberta, you're going to have, generally they'll be Caucasian, they'll be of the same religion, it won't be as diverse. It creates a different sense of community. So I'd say here, what I would say affecting young people are concerns for equality, respect for diversity, and building a multicultural society that is harmonious and vibrant, I think would probably be something that would be of unique concern to young people who live here.
Yeah, we completely agree with all those issues. And in regards to those, what strategies, motions, or bills have you advocated for or think Canada should adopt in general to really tackle some of the issues we just talked about?
I think I've introduced 25 separate pieces of legislation in Parliament. So I'll take a wide cut at this first. I introduced the first bill for dental care and for pharmacare in House of Commons. Now these are affordability measures, they're health measures, but they're affordability measures because, if you don't have dental coverage or if you can't afford your prescription pills, then that's a burden on you economically. Yeah. So if we can provide those kinds of resources to people through public insurance, then that frees up money for people to spend on other things. I have a bill to provide free education for people who live with disabilities. Yeah. Now, I personally think that all post-secondary education of all types, university, community college, apprenticeships, you name it, whatever you want to do after grade 12 to sort of increase your skill set, I believe should be free, just like primary education is free. Or maybe a very, very small cost, just so you have some skin in the game, keep you honest. But there should be no barrier between people your age to be able to pursue whatever higher education you want. And I say that not because of social justice only, because it's social justice. I want every single person in society to be able to reach their potential. Not only because we don't know where the next Einstein or Mozart is going to come from, but it's not necessarily the wealthy people who do that, but also because it's good economically. The best performing economies in the world are always the highest educated. And so if we can increase the educational level of everybody in society, you actually create a stronger economic base. I think we all benefit from that. So better for you individually, better for all of us collectively. Other legislation, I think those are some of the ones that come to my mind first. I'll talk a little bit later about lowering the voting age, but that's another one that I think is important to gain the insight and creativity of young people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, following on the vein sort of what we were just talking about post-secondary education, this current life-changing, amazing opportunity, as you said, like where you probably students find what they want to do with the rest of their lives, if they want to become the next Mozart, and find the people they call friends for the rest of their lives. Now, sadly, it's becoming a lot more unaffordable for so many students. And in fact, the average student loan debt in Canada right now is a whopping $28,000. On average, taking students more than 10 years just to pay off their student loans. So we know that you're a huge proponent for more accessible and affordable education to all students alike, no matter their background. We know you've done so much in this regard, whether it be Bill 328, developing a national strategy with the objective of reducing student loan debt by targeting things such as eliminating interest, increasing non-repayable student grants, or your other really vital bill, C246, as you just talked about, really providing tuition-free post-secondary education for Canadians with disabilities, giving much more vulnerable members of our communities a fair shot and an equal chance at thriving in society. So our question to you is, we're wondering, what do you think of the current state of post-secondary education in Canada, and how will your bills and motions and strategy sort of make sure that this critical opportunity is both accessible and affordable for all generations?
You know, I'm going to start by telling you, painting a picture of a different way. So when I went to university, I entered university at the University of Alberta in 1981.
Yeah.
My tuition for the first term, which was September to December, they split up, and then the second term was January, April, that's your first year, was $350 per term. So it cost me $700 to pay for my first year university. My books, I remember, were almost as much money. So I came from a working class family. My mom was a school secretary. My dad was a salesman. Neither of my parents finished high school. Both of them ended up just getting a little bit through grade 12. So my older sister and I were the first two to ever go to university. I can tell you that we would not have been able to go to university if it had been as expensive as it is today.
Yeah.
So I got through 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts and a law degree in 8 years, and I graduated, and I had a student loan of $2,000. That's it. So back then, you could come from a modest background. My parents didn't give me any money. All I did was I worked in the summer. You know, as soon as I remember getting picked up in a truck after my last exam, I went to the bathroom, changed clothes, and I landscaped. And we went out. We started doing landscaping for May, June, July, and August. So I worked 4 months. Took a week off before I started school, and then I worked at a gas station a couple nights a week. Just that amount of work, I could pay for my entire education.
Wow.
So you fast forward to today, you asked, you know, what do I think of the situation today, where it's deteriorated over the last, 35 years. Tuition has skyrocketed. It's become much more competitive. We haven't increased the number of seats. So I know that there's young people who want to go to university, say UBC or SFU or whatever, that they can't necessarily get in.
Yeah.
Not because they're not smart enough or that they can't handle the work, they could, but because either they can't afford it or there's not enough seats. The other public policy that I think has been a mistake is international students are pivotal to our universities.
Yeah.
It's really important that we, for a number of reasons, it creates a diversity in our universities. We incubate, bring the world's minds together.
Yeah.
We incubate, we share. This is a social justice issue because sometimes we're educating people from second and third world countries.
For sure.
But what I think has happened is various governments, mainly right-wing governments, have gradually starved post-secondary education funds. So universities have had to rely more and more and more on international students. Because they have to, because they charge extremely high differential fees. So they're charging like 4 times the rate of tuition.
Oh, wow.
Like I think I read at UBC, they're charging $35,000 to $40,000 per year for tuition for an international student. Might cost a domestic student $8,000. And so I think the whole funding model is broken. So what I want to get back to is this. You know, my grandparents on my mother's side, my grandmother had grade 3, my grandfather had grade 6. They came from rural Hungary in Europe. Back in the 19-teens, that was considered not unusual. Again, my parents in the 1950s, they almost finished high school. Now I think today, you almost have to have some form of post-secondary education in order to get a skill set and to function. So I think we should consider post-secondary education as an extension of our public education system. And other countries do that. You know, the University of Vienna in Austria, free tuition, including for international students. You could apply to the University of Vienna and it'd be free tuition if you got in. So I think we have to quit thinking of post-secondary education as a luxury or as something that is only available to people that can afford it. And we should radically change our thinking and say, we want everybody to have access. So those bills you talked about are examples of ways that I think we can move towards that. With the free tuition for people with disabilities, I wanted to create a model of free tuition. And so why not start with people who have the most barriers?
For sure.
And the other one's about eliminating interest on student loans. Why should the government charge you money by lending you money and make money off you like you're a credit card customer to fund your education? So I wanted to eliminate credit card or student loan interest and increase grants. So that in the meantime, so that we can make education accessible to more people. But ultimately, the goal should be, you want to go, you go. And the final thing I'll say is we got to build more seats. I'm proud of the BC NDP government. It's the only government that I can think of in the country in the last 25 years that actually built a new university. That's the University of Northern BC. And they're actually adding, I think, 2 new medical schools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
One at UNBC and one that they're building at Simon Fraser.
Yes. Yeah.
We need more family doctors. So, like, I think every province in the country should be building 2, 3, 4 more universities so that we create spots for everybody who wants to go.
Yeah, that was really inspiring. Just like thinking, like changing our mindset to realize that education is not just like a want, but it's a need for everyone, and it's essential for everyone to have. I think that was really cool. So moving on, another issue that currently plagues so many youth, especially as we talked about, considering the rise of cost of living just in Canada, the affordability issues in Canada. That topic is food insecurity. Now, this is an issue that is oftentimes pushed to the wayside, but as we know, has detrimental impacts, especially on the youth populace. In fact, 57% of Canadian university students right now are not able to afford enough food for themselves. And in 2022 alone, more than 1.8 million children lived in families that are struggling to put food on the table, which is really shocking to me. Now, this is an issue that is bad in of itself, that should definitely be solved, but can also indirectly cause so many other issues. For example, like if a student goes to school hungry, for example, chances are they might not focus the best, they might not attain the best grades, there's health consequences there, etc. So we know this is an issue that so many youth are passionate about, and you have done so much for it. And in fact, you've tabled your own private member's bill, Bill C-212, pushing for detailed plans for a national school nutrition program to ensure that all children have access to safe and healthy food in school, operating at little or no direct cost to children or their families. So we are wondering if you could please discuss what sort of prompted you to push this bill forward, because we're really, really inspired and curious by it. And what importance can this have to children and their families alike in Canada?
Well, I've long been conscious of inequities in school. Again, as I said, I grew up in a sort of a working class household. I remember going to school hungry. I remember noticing other students that didn't have access to nutrition. So it's always been kind of something I've noticed. I would really credit a local group here called Fresh Roots. They met with me probably 10 years ago, and they were a local grassroots organization that what they wanted to do was grow food in schoolyards and get students involved in the process. And they are the ones that gave me some of those stark statistics that you talked about. Food insecurity has been with us for many, many years. I think it's gotten very acute in the last, say, 3-4 years in particular. I read a statistic that 1 in 4 young Canadians between the ages of 18 and 24, 1 in 4, has been to a food bank in the last month. We're a G7 country. We're one of the wealthiest countries on earth. And you're thinking 1 in 4 of our young people is having to go to a food bank? That's shameful. It's a disgrace. It's unnecessary. So Fresh Roots, they educated me a lot about the depth of the problem. And now, at first I thought it was a social justice issue only, which is, I thought, darn it, every child from grade 1 to grade 12 that goes into a classroom should have access to a nutritious breakfast and lunch. I thought just as a matter of equality, but it has grown to be so much more than that. So then I started, as you pointed out so well, it also became an educational issue, because obviously kids that are hungry aren't learning as well. So it's a learning issue. Then the third issue is one of health. So, we want to teach kids from grade 1 to grade 12 how to make, say, 5 healthy meals from 5 healthy ingredients locally sourced. Now think of the health impacts of that. If you can teach kids how to eat healthy from the age of 6, and you extrapolate that 20, 30 years down the road, you tell me what the impact on people's health are. Eliminating childhood obesity, eliminating adult obesity, reducing incidence of diabetes, all sorts of health issues, by simply teaching children about nutrition. But think of the educational aspects as well. 90% of a schoolyard is not used 90% of the time. We could walk over to a schoolyard near here and watch it'll be empty.
Yeah.
So Fresh Roots taught me that what we should be doing is we should be growing food in the schoolyard.
Oh.
So imagine when kids come back to school and in the
Cool.
springtime, they learn about botany, they learn about plant genetics, they learn about locally sourced food, they learn about indigenous things, learn about local cultural influences on food.
Yeah.
And they can plant their own gardens in the springtime, maybe harvest at the end of school or come back in the fall and harvest. Use that food in their schoolyard. That's a way more fun way to learn about
Yeah.
genetics than reading about Gregor Mendel
Yeah,
in a book,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The kids could be out there splicing peas themselves.
Yeah.
I've been to schools where that's happened, and I've seen grade 4s eating kale at lunchtime, squealing with delight because they grew it.
Yeah. That's so
Right?
cool.
Try to get
Yeah.
a 10-year-old to eat kale otherwise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't
It's
want to
not
eat that.
happening.
So I guess the last thing I'll tell you is I'm really proud of one thing, and it shows how an idea that's locally germinated, like for the work from Fresh Roots, taking the time to come meet with me, educating me. I draft a bill. In this budget that just passed in the springtime of 2024, we actually allocated $1 billion over 5 years
Wow.
to start the very first national school nutrition program.
Wow.
And by the way,
Congratulations.
we're the
Yeah.
only G7 country that doesn't have some form of a national school food program. So it's a start. It's not, I think it's slated to get school nutrition for 400,000 kids. There's 2 million kids
Yeah.
between grade 1 and grade 8 in Canada.
Yeah.
So we have a lot more work to do, but we got that started. So it shows that local energy and ideas can actually find their way into affecting public policy with a concrete result. And we could see that money start flowing as early as this September.
Wow,
Wow.
that's really amazing. Just see like how like local individuals who are really passionate about the idea can come to someone who has everything like influence and like the knowledge about how to really enact these like social justice issues is really, really cool. We know another key problem facing a lot of youth right now, specifically in BC but all around Canada, is the idea of like vaping addiction. And then doing some research, we found like 26% of students in grade 7 all the way to grade
Wow.
12 in British Columbia have reportedly vaped in 2023. And like if we think about it, grade 7
That's
students
absurd,
in no
yeah.
world should be actually having access to vaping. And research has consistently shown the harmful effects of vaping, whether it be like brain development, mental health, or even physical health, particularly the lungs and hearts. And we're particularly interested in your Motion 103, which would address this epidemic by restricting flavored vapes to only tobacco flavor. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure MP Davies will explain a little bit more than I do, is that youth are actually one of the primary users of these like flavored vapes. So like flavors like I don't know, like strawberry, bubblegum, or like all these like cool sounding names but are really, really toxic to you. And actually by limiting the options, we can actually discourage not only youth but a lot of individuals to discourage them from from vaping altogether. So our question for you is, could you explain a little bit more about how this initiative would be implemented? Will it be like a sudden change, or will it be a gradual transition where we would slowly phase out different flavored vapes? And how effective do you think this motion will be at really reducing youth vaping?
Well, I'll answer your question directly and then I'll backfill it a bit. So
Yeah.
the answer is it would be immediate.
Yeah.
So my motion calls for an immediate ban on all flavored
Cool.
vaping products and cotton candy,
Yeah.
bubblegum, things like that. So let me tell you the context for this is when you're in federal politics, you start getting, I think, exposed to and you learn about powerful lobbying
Yeah.
forces in society.
Yeah.
The big pharmaceutical industry,
really
very
big,
powerful.
yeah.
Billions and billions and billions of dollars of an industry, and they very aggressively advance their interests. Big tobacco, same thing.
Huge, yeah.
Billions and billions and billions of dollars, very sophisticated lobbying and marketing efforts. Let's just tell the truth here. Nicotine products, tobacco products, are carcinogens.
Yeah.
They cause cancer, and that's known. That's just science, and they're addictive. Frankly, you have to ask yourself the question: why did we as a society even allow the sale of a product that we know will kill you, and it's highly addictive? So once you start on it, it's extremely difficult to stop. Can you imagine if we allowed cereal makers marketing to children to put in some substance that hooked the children on that so they couldn't stop eating Applejack? It's a very nefarious product. We know that about tobacco. I think what's happened is we've been very successful with public education programs and measures like vastly increasing taxes on tobacco and things like plain packaging, restricting sales behind counters, very, very strict age buying things. All of those policy measures have really dropped the level of smoking cigarettes. I think Big Tobacco has responded by creating new products that are intended to hook a new generation of young people on nicotine. And that's what I think vaping is. Now, what they will say is the industry's lobbying efforts will say, no, vaping is a smoking cessation device. That's what they say is, this is a good thing, they'll say, because this will help people get off smoking tobacco. Do you know, as we sit here today, not a single application to Health Canada has been made for any vaping product to get Health Canada to approve it as a smoking cessation device. So not only has it not been approved as that, there's not even been an attempt to do it because there's no data to support that. So it's a claim that they make because it sounds good, but there's no data. Now, here's the other thing. If it really were a smoking cessation device, then why the need to have flavors like bubblegum and candy, cotton candy, and mango, right? That's not as, if I'm a smoker and I want to go from cigarettes to vaping because arguably it's better for me, and it may be because you're not burning, so you lose some of the harmful effects of burning, then why are we using child attractive flavors? By the way, cigarettes used to be marketed that way too. There used to be menthol and other things to sort of try to make it more attractive, particularly to women. We banned that. Okay, cigarettes only come in tobacco flavor. There's no flavoring of tobacco allowed. Why would we allow flavoring of vaping products? And I think the proof is in the pudding. We have an epidemic among young people in this country of kids starting vaping. Highly addictive, because nicotine is highly addictive, with flavors that are, nobody can tell me they're not meant to attract young people. So I say this is a very sophisticated attempt by Big Tobacco to try to hook a new generation of nicotine, and it should be stopped immediately. No menthol, nothing. Just if it's truly smoking cessation, it should taste the same as tobacco. And the fact that they don't do that, I think, tells you about their motivations. So I think we got to put a hard stop to this now. And frankly, I argued this from the beginning, and the Trudeau government didn't listen. They did not bring in a ban on flavors. I mean, my motion's been on the books for quite some time. And it was brought up even before that. So the fact that they won't move on this, I think, is risking the health of young people, all to pad the profits of Big Tobacco. And it's wrong, and it should stop.
I just want to say thank you for pointing out such a blatantly obvious issue and taking a stance on it and helping save millions of youth across the nation. So thank you for that. So at this point in the interview, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the youth a little bit more. So in recent years in Canada, there has sadly been a decline in youth engagement. So this can be evidenced by less or lower amounts of youth participation at the polls, less youth being represented at the federal level. So we wanted to ask you, in what aspects, according to you, can the youth become more engaged in the political sphere? And secondly, how can we as a youth help address some of the issues that we just talked about that Canada currently faces?
Well, excellent question. I just want to say, boy, looking at both of you and seeing your efforts at this gives me so much hope for the future.
Thank you.
Your engagement is exactly what we need more of. So, I mean, there's the classic things like young people, they should, I think, first of all, take an interest in politics. And by politics, it's gotten a bit of a bad reputation. I don't mean in a bad way. I mean, politics should be what's going on around you. It should be what's going on in society. What are the problems that we're experiencing? What are the solutions that we may have? There's limited resources in a society, so how we allocate those resources is important. Do we spend money on the military? Do we spend money on education? Do we spend money on improving healthcare? Do we spend money on building more roads for cars? These are critical decisions that affect everybody and make a big decision. So we need young people to take an interest in those and to form opinions, whatever your opinion is. You know, I'm not trying to direct anybody to be NDP, Conservative, Liberal, whatever your particular value system or thought processes gets you is welcome. I think volunteering in, whether it's in MP's offices or MLA's offices or, joining political parties is really important. Parties really want the voices of young people involved. So being involved in that process. Look, I'm going to stop here and tell you this. Democracy is like a garden. It needs to be tended, it needs to be weeded, it needs to be fertilized, it needs to be tilled. It's a work in progress that if you leave it alone and don't pay attention to it, it doesn't produce.
Yeah.
And it's not a destination where we can say, well, we've got our democracy here, let's all go to the beach. It's all done, nothing needs to be done, we're here. We need to put that work into it. So that's sort of the heavy line. The positive part of it is we need the energy and optimism and perspective of youth. A democracy is taking all the groups of people in society and bringing their voices in so that we have the fullest picture of what our citizens want. If democracy is about government by the people, for the people, then we need to have as many people as possible involved. Sure. And I am concerned that young people have been increasingly turned off. I don't think it's their fault. I think there's lots of fault around, primarily from politicians and political parties have not done a good job reaching out. I think we'll talk about this in a second.
Yeah.
The political system we have, I think, has been fossilized. It was invented before the invention of the automobile, before the invention of the plane, and we still stick to it. We're not experimenting and modernizing our election system, and we're failing to recognize that our electoral system turns people off, and we need to be creative about finding ways to reverse that. And I've got some ideas on how to do that.
For sure.
Yeah. So talking about the idea that you have in mind, we know you have been a strong advocate in decreasing the federal voting age, or like the voting age for all elections, down to 16. You've passed many bills on this. And Jason and I, as we talked a little about before the interview, are actually just partnered with Vote 16 to really make this dream that we all have into reality. So given all your amazing experience and knowledge in this field, we are wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the importance of decreasing the voting age down to 16 and the implications it may have on our democracy.
Well, thanks for asking that. It's critical. So first of all, the thing to realize is that the history of the vote is one of constant movement.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, at one time, we restricted voting in this country to men who owned property.
Yeah.
White men who owned property. Then it was men who owned property. Then it was 30-year-olds who could vote. Then it was reduced to 21. Then women were allowed to vote. And then Indigenous people were allowed to vote. And then Japanese Canadians were allowed to vote. And then we reduced it from 21 to 18. So there's been a constant enlargement of the franchise. That's the history of it. Like you go back to pre-democracy times, there was no vote.
Yeah.
So it's the history of the vote is one of taking control from a group of hereditary people and gradually expanding and democratizing it. So that's the first thing. When people are frozen on 18 as if there's some magic to that number. It's an arbitrary number. So let's get into some facts now and some logic. So many 16 and 17-year-olds work and pay taxes, right? Yet they have no say in how their taxes are spent. Didn't we have a revolution in the United States over the principle of no taxation without representation? People rebelled over that. If we're going to tax you, then I say you have a right to have your say in how your tax money is spent.
For sure.
We allow 16, 17-year-olds to drive, to join the military if you're 17, to get married with your parental permission. Not that I'm encouraging anybody to get married, but in theory with parental permission you can. So we allow people, 17-year-olds, and in some cases 16-year-olds, to do incredibly important things. Yet, something as as basic as allowing you to decide who you want to represent you. We consider that to be beyond you. Next thing I'll say is, I've met many 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds who are engaged, who are interested, and they have opinions.
For sure.
Far more than people 50 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. Yet we allow a disinterested 60-year-old to vote, but not an engaged 17-year-old.
Yeah.
To me, it's discriminatory. I actually think it's a violation of our Charter of Rights. I think it's discrimination on the basis of age. And in fact, I understand some young people have started a lawsuit. I believe when it goes to court, they will win that lawsuit. And finally, I just think that for our democracy, we want that energy and optimism and perspective of 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds injected into our decision making. As I said earlier, you have the longest horizon. So imagine this, an 85-year-old walks into the poll and are voting. Now, what issues may be most important to that person who's 85 years old? Now, it could be all sorts of things, right? I don't want to stereotype. But probably what they're most interested in affecting them is different than a 17-year-old, right?
Sure.
Because, like I said, the decisions we make today are going to affect you 80 years down the road. So you may favor decisions that may protect our environment for longer. An 85-year-old may be more interested in increasing their old age pension for the moment. Both are valid. Both perspectives are valid. I'm not making a value judgment on it, but they're different. So, and finally, I've seen research on this. If you vote in the first election that you are eligible to vote in, you're likely to keep voting forever.
Lifelong voter,
What did we have in last federal elections? Voter turnout's usually around 60%, and that's the highest of all the jurisdictions. So that means, my math's bad, forgive me, but that means about 1 in 2 people don't even vote. Now, if you go to provincial elections and municipal elections, it can be like 30%, 25%. So how do we find ways to reinvigorate and inject more interest into our democratic processes? I say that this is what you do. If you lower the voting age to 16, we have elections every 4 years. So let's say you're in grade 10, you're 16. The chance of there being an election when you're 16, 17, or 18, grade 10, 11, and 12 is 3 in 4. If you combine voting with really strong civics programs in high schools in Canada, and again, nonpartisan. I mean, learn about the parties, learn about the policies, learn about the processes. And you're guided along and you vote under the guidance of our public education system. You're likely to leave high school and continue voting. But if you don't do that right now, when you're 18, the first election that most young people will ever experience is after they've left high school without that guidance. So a lot of students slip out of the process and never vote. And if you don't vote, then chances are they won't. So I view it also as a democratic development process as well as something that's important for our country. And last thing I'll tell you is this: I want you guys to vote. Look at you guys, engaged, smart, enthusiastic, willing. Like, what kind of crazy democracy wouldn't be clamoring to have your voice heard? Like, it's good for all of us.
Sure.
And the other thing I just want to just briefly mention, I'll let you, if you want me to go further, I will, is proportional representation. Very, very important, because when you have a first past the post system, many votes don't count in this country. So if you're a New Democrat and you live in rural Alberta, you go vote, chances are your vote just won't count. But with proportional representation, doesn't matter where you live, when you cast a vote, if 22% of the population votes NDP,
You get 22%.
22% of the seats. If 5% vote Green, you get 5% of the seats. Then it doesn't matter where you are, your vote counts. And that's another thing that I think we should be implementing in Canada, not only because it results in a fairer, more representative parliament, but because it tells each voter you matter.
You're important.
And so we should be experimenting with these things in our democracy. Try it for 3 elections. If it doesn't work, go back to the previous system. Like, let's be experimental. No business could survive if you didn't innovate and try new things. And sometimes that means you fail. But why don't we do the same things with our democracy instead of insisting on an 18th century concept that we don't want to change? I think it's wrong.
Yeah, wow, that was definitely very inspirational, but also educational at the same time. Just saying, like, not only is it on like a moral basis, it's wrong, but all like the impacts it may have is really, really cool. So for our last question, it's more about all the amazing work you've done. And for those who don't know, MP Davies actually introduced more legislation in the House of Commons than any other MP in our country. And having spoken to quite a few MPs already, we know how busy their schedules are, even if they pass like 1 or 2 motions or 1 or 2 bills. So we must know you're super, super busy doing all the amazing work you do. And even in terms of like researching for today, Jason and I were clicking through like the motions and bills, and there was like multiple pages we had to click through because of everything you've done. So even choosing what we had to talk about today was really difficult because of everything you've done. So we were just wondering, and we're really dying to know, what really drives you, and what is your motivation to continue doing all this amazing work, and what do you do to like de-stress and relax?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for those questions. On the first question, I remember our former leader, Jack Layton. He used to tell us that the job of a good opposition is not just to oppose, it's to propose. And so it's not just enough to sit back and criticize what the government's doing, although that is an important part of what oppositions do in a parliamentary democracy. It's holding them to account, it's probing, it keeps the government honest. That's important. But I think you can't just critique, you have to sort of say, here's an idea that I think the government should adopt. So I took that to heart. I ran with Jack back in 2008. And so I started right from then, and I thought one of the ways that I can propose ideas is by introducing legislation and motions into Parliament, get them on the floor of the House of Commons, and hope that governments will maybe act on them. And that way I could provide a positive, constructive presence in Parliament, as well as the oppositional one. And by the way, I'll tell you, to give you some hope for the future, there is a fair bit of cooperation among people across all parties. Yeah. We agree on far more than people think, and sometimes maybe we disagree on. So good ideas come from all sides of the spectrum. No party's got a monopoly on good ideas. So that's why I've done that. The other thing that I did early on that I'm very proud of kind of merges maybe the last 2 subjects of young people and democracy and legislation. I started a contest 15 years ago called Create Your Canada. So what I do is I go into the high schools in my riding, and it's all online, so I want to make it enviro sensitive, no paper. And so it's an online contest I run from January to March every year. I invite grade 11 and 12 students to submit their ideas on what they think would make Canada or the world a better place. And then we pick the winner, sometimes 2, and I take those to Ottawa and I draft them into actual private members' bills. Then I fly the students to Ottawa, and for 3 days I tour them through Parliament, I show them all over the place, and I introduce their bill with them sitting in the House of Commons on the floor to give them a portal to show that their voice matters and their ideas concrete. So that's been a source of a number of my private members' bills have come from young people in the high schools of Vancouver Kingsway. Some of the best ideas have come from them, actually. Things like recycling electronic waste. A bill to provide a tax incentive to restaurants. There's tons of restaurants in Vancouver Kingsway, so that if they donate their food every night, they would get a tax break, helping the business.
That's really, really
while
neat.
Also using, we're talking about food insecurity, instead of food waste, reusing that food in a productive way. Those are ideas that came from people like you. It wasn't my idea. So that's kind of the reason why I think it's an important part of an MP's job to introduce legislation. And what do I do to relax? Good question. Well, it's an MP's job is really 24/7, 365 days a year, if you let it. So one thing that's important for me is I always try to take at least 2 weeks in the summer, and I take 2 weeks over the holiday break at Christmas time in December. And the other thing I like to read. I like racket sports. I love badminton, tennis. I haven't played enough, but I really love all racket sports. Read and I love to spend time with my family. So I think it's important to stay connected with community as well. You know, the most important thing to me is that I stay grounded with the people in my community.
Yeah.
I stay very close with them. I always know I don't work for, they don't work for me. I work for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, being an MP is a privilege, and it's an honor. It's my job to carry their voice to Ottawa. So I try to go to as many social and cultural events as possible. And I find that relaxing and energizing to be with my people, as well as I think it's an important way for me to stay grounded and to understand what's going on really in people's lives so that I can better reflect their voices in Ottawa.
Wow, yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. Even though you're working, you're always staying engaged with the community. So that's really
Yeah, you have a BBQ coming up,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
really cool to see. Yeah. Yeah, all right. I think that concludes our interview. Again, Jerry and I would like to extend a huge thank you to MP Davies and his phenomenal team for this amazing opportunity and taking time out of your very busy schedule to sit here and come here and actually meet with us today. We truly appreciate it. I know during this talk and even preparing for this talk, Jerry and I learned so much, and I'm sure the viewers will at home when this interview comes out. So thank you guys again. If you guys want to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune into future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.